This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
My name's Laurie Wandtke. I'm from Nevada County, grew up here, moved to Chico when I went away to college, and then eventually settled there with my husband and family now, and that's just where I'm settled. I moved to Chico to go to college, graduated, and both eventually my husband and I got jobs, and we bought a house in Paradise because it's so similar to Grass Valley. The cool nights, and it's not quite as hot as the valley. Lots of trees. It's beautiful, and that's why we chose Paradise initially. It's a smaller community. Our daughter is in first grade, and she was on softball team. She's in the Pine Ridge 4-H group up in Paradise. We have lots of friends there, so we're either playing soccer or baseball. Hanging out at the park. There's so many cool little parks to hang out up there. Just, going to the movies, being in town. We'd formed quite tight-knit community. I volunteered at the elementary school, so I'd, gotten to know lots of the kids and families there, and it was great. So just felt very connected to the community. Because I grew up in Nevada County, with the 49er fire being a major experience in my childhood, though we didn't lose our home or even have it come too near, we did evacuate, and it certainly left an impression on me and what wildfire can do and how fast it can happen. I believe I was 9, and I remember playing outside. It was a Sunday, I believe, and seeing that telltale column of smoke, and it was far. Living in Penn Valley, it was far, but then I just remember it growing wider and darker and taller, and talking to my mom and dad, there's a fire, and of course, it's way off there, you don't have to worry. And by nightfall that night, seeing the orange glow, and then having those big embers land on our roof, which at the time were shake shingles, which is, you don't want that happening. And my dad saying, okay, let's get in the truck, let's get photos, papers, and everything we can, get the dog, and the whole family piled in the truck, and we went up to Grass Valley at that time. My husband travels for work on occasion, and that early November, he had been in New Orleans for a 5-day trip. So on November 7th, he came home, flew back into Sacramento, and got home at about midnight. And I stayed up, hey, missed you, good to see you, okay, tomorrow's school, we got a regular day ahead. So went to bed and woke up the next morning, and just like usual. We don't have any east-facing windows, so we're not watching the sky. It's the usual day. My daughter's super excited because her dad's home. I'm making eggs. They're doing their regular thing. So we're running 10 minutes behind from a regular day, and I run into the closet. It's time to get dressed. It's time to take my daughter to school. My husband, that's firing up his truck. It's time to go. So he has a remote start on his truck, and he pushed the button to fire it up, and I'm changing clothes in the closet, and I just happened to open up Facebook to see, hey, what's going on today while I'm changing, and I see a post from a community member to a larger group that said, report of a fire near Pulga. And I know in my mind, Pulga is not far, but it's a canyon over, a ridge over. We don't need to freak out yet, but let's be aware of what's going on. And because of my experience in the past, what I do and have done all summers since is when I see or hear about a fire, I immediately turn over to a public scanner, police or fire. So I did that whilst getting dressed, and I heard the scanner traffic like I'd never heard before. The voices usually in CAL FIRE are very, calm but calculated, and they still were, though their sense of urgency was like nothing I'd heard before. And I had heard the voice order 45 strike teams, which is unprecedented, and ordinarily in a wildfire I've heard 4 strike teams or 5 strike teams. A strike team is an engine and 4 or 5 firefighters. So that caught my attention right away. And so I went back into the kitchen and I told my husband, there's a fire going. And my daughter went to the front window and said, Mom, look at the orange sky. So then I said, okay, let's go. Let's pack it up. Let's get out. Even before any sort of media, warnings had gone out. And so my husband said, wait, let's see what's going on. So he said, let's take a drive around the block. I'm going, I don't want to use that time, but yes. So we hopped in our truck and went, there are no blocks, but down out to the Skyway, which is the main road. It's not even a column at that time. It's just, the sky is now black. And so, of course, we didn't need any more convincing. My husband, we went to the gas station at that time, which was a great thing to do. But ordinarily, you should have your tank full. So stopped and got gas and then went home. And what my husband immediately did then was hook up our trailer and pull, out into the front of the house. And I emptied our safe, and I had all of our go boxes, which are, all those documents, birth certificates and insurance papers and photos and, class pictures and all those things. Because of my past experience, I have them all where I know where they should be and they can go in a hurry. And I packed, a small cooler full of snacks and drinks because I'd evacuated so many times before that I know that you're going to be in the car for a while. I happened to have our cats come to the back door because it was so windy that day that I opened the door and they came in. My husband put them in their carrier. We walked by my daughter's room. I walked by my daughter's room and we handed her 2 or 3 backpacks and said, pack what you love. Everything's fine. Just in case. So she immediately emptied all her drawers and all her, her loveys and her blankets and her things got stuffed into backpacks. And so my trips past her room, I'm keeping an eye what she's doing. And I come past and she's got tears running down her cheeks. And I said, why are you crying? We're okay. And she goes, well, what about Mr. Waterfall? That's her goldfish. So my husband and I are going, oh, geez, we don't need to pack the goldfish. We'll be back. But okay, let's put the goldfish in. So we got her little goldfish tank and put it with us in the trailer. So now we have the whole family. So we stop briefly at the front door and say, so do we want to take 2 cars or we just want to take yours? And having been through what I went through in 2008, I don't want to be separated from my family because I've been in that traffic, people evacuating and how frantic it can be. And it's just not worth a vehicle to me. So we all got into my husband's truck and stopped to talk to our neighbors, and most of them are elderly. And a few were aware and few were unaware of what was going on, but said, need to get out now. And by this time, there's kind of like potato chip sized chunks raining down, burned or on fire. And it sounds like hail. And I know it's coming. I know it's not far. And so we're warning our neighbors to get out. My husband knocked on the people's door across the street. The husband works a night security job, so he was sleeping. But just now, it's now time to go. So we pulled out of our driveway, made it out onto the Skyway, which is very similar to Highway 20. And it was bumper to bumper, though it was moving. At that time, traffic was moving. and people were still being courteous and, following the red lights. And so we came down to the base of Paradise where it opens up into a canyon. And we look to the right, and there's pine trees that are just 200-foot flames just up, and that's the first time in evacuating. This is probably the 6th time we'd evacuated in 15 years, but the first time that we actually saw fire when we were evacuating. So at that time, things kind of shifted for my husband and I as to what we were facing and the reality that going home is not likely going to happen. But we were luckily not engulfed by fire. Had we left 20 minutes later, that's the experience that people had. And so we got down to Chico, and we were calling RV parks because we needed a place to park overnight to get our bearings to even know what to do. So, and we pulled into the Walmart parking lot and kind of assessed where we wanted to be and called around and found one last open spot. And so we're there, most of the day, kind of bounced around between some friends' houses. And then we came, we had dinner with a coworker of my husband's and came back to the trailer, and, obviously the fire is raging at this point, and that the ridge is red. So I have a brother who works for CAL FIRE, and I got a text message around 9:30, and which is not at all common when he's fighting fire. And the text message said, "Where are you?" And at that moment, I knew why he's asking where I was. And I just had that brief moment of panic and that flash of fear, and I gave him the address to where we are, and he said, "I'm coming to you," and I said, "Okay," and I left it at that because I knew why. And I said, so my husband and I waited there when he arrived, and he got out of his vehicle, and I could tell on his face, And I said, "Is there anything left?" And he just shook his head no. And he said, "It wouldn't be so bad, Laura, if your house burned down, but the whole town's gone." And so that was a shock, but scary, and I still didn't even understand it all at that point. It was total numbness for me. I felt anxious about what are we going to do now? But the reality hadn't hit and wouldn't for about 2 more months. I felt numb and lost, though I was so surrounded by love and family and friends. I've just felt without anchor and disoriented and tired. It was unreal. So our neighbor, her name's Diane, and she's lovely. She's like our daughter's grandma. She makes this, homemade ice cream. She's just lovely. So she's very dear to us. And I went next door twice in that process of packing and said, "Diane, it's time." She's 85, and she's lived in that house 50 years. And without scaring and yelling at her to get out, I urged, "Okay, so it's time to go, Diane." And she survived 2008, and she's spry, and she's smart, and so still wasn't moving as fast as we would like her to. So my husband went over when we were leaving and set the timer on her microwave and said, "When this goes off, you better be out of this house." And we gave her hugs and got in the truck. And that, I was sick that we were leaving, and if I could do anything differently about that fire, it was just to put her in the truck and take her with us. And so I called her when we got to Chico, and her phone just rang and rang. and I was so afraid that something had happened to her. And then I did, maybe an hour later, get a hold of her, and she answered, and I was just rushed over with relief. But she did leave about 40 minutes later than we did and drove through fire and had a different experience, than we did, but made it safely. Well, ours was a special circumstance in the sense that we have, they had opened up the Pence side of town, so the east side, to the public, but they had not opened our zones. And we had a friend who is in law enforcement and was able to let us ride with him. What was it like that day? Well, it was, I was, of course, just curious. What did town look like? Is the store still there? Did the post office make it? But I remember thinking, gosh, if I just have a good pair of boots, I'll be all right. I can get in there and see if there's anything left, which is as far as my thought process was going. So we drove into Paradise and got up to, it was like the moon. And it was before the public was allowed in, so there weren't orange cones and there weren't guys cutting trees down. It was just totally uninhabited. There's no squirrels, there's no birds, there's nothing. And it was white. The ash was white and the trees were black, and it was just very stark and colorless. The yellow lines on the road are about it for color. And when we pulled up to our house, for me, it was just total numbness. My husband, broke down. To me, it sounds crazy, but I felt a sense of relief that I got my family out. Like I felt like we won. We did it, and I didn't even know what else to think beyond that. Looking at our house, of course everything's black and bent and twisted, but you could see pops of color. What was our blue tile in our kitchen, and things you don't think of. There's no sinks, there's no toilets. Where'd they go? It was unreal, but I felt just this huge sense of relief that we got out. It takes a while to really realize the scope of loss, and I don't know how to explain it. It makes the loss exponential, because if just my home had burned, then I would have my neighbors. Well, my neighbors' homes burned too. Well, then my daughter's school burned also. Well, then the store burned also. And the loss, what hurts the most is that even if we do or did rebuild our home, the community is entirely different. Not to say less desirable, but I can't ever go back to the way it was that day. For me, there's so much positive, and I try to preface that with really realizing the depth of the situation. People passed and had horrifying experiences, but for me, through this experience, the bonds that have been created are just unequaled. The community that has come to support us, the families, companies, nationwide, worldwide, the outpouring of support has just been overwhelming. And if I were to miss anything from that time, it's that. The world caught us so softly, and we felt really blessed and loved by our families, our friends, the community itself, strangers alike. It was amazing. It's interesting to watch the human dynamic kind of break apart into, there are people whose homes survived, though they are uninhabitable, which is I believe, a worse situation than if your house burned down. There are people whose homes survived and are livable, and they are very, gung-ho about getting the community reestablished. And I think it really has to do with, the hierarchy of needs, right? You have safety, and then you kind of, so a lot of us, speaking for myself, a lot of us are just trying to establish the base before we can really think about thriving again in the situation we had before. So it's just interesting to watch the dynamic, and it's hard not to, everyone seems so divided and so flip-flopping between I can't wait to start building, let's break ground, and I'll never go back to that ridge again. And it's divided, and it's warranted on every level by whoever feels it on whatever day. And so it's really interesting to watch the human nature. My daughter did go to school at Ponderosa Elementary in Paradise, which the kindergarten wing was lost and the cafeteria and office were damaged, but for the most part the campus still stands, but of course you can't hold school there. So she goes to school in Durham. Durham Elementary absorbed our entire campus in a 2-week period, with 2 weeks warning, and welcomed us there. And so we run separate from Durham Elementary, but so I've been, lucky enough to be involved in helping there, and we're buying a garbage can, we're buying towels, we're building a new home. It's a really odd sensation. You feel like you're going back to college because we moved into an apartment, but you got married because you have all these new things, and you just had a baby, but she's 7. All these things coming in that you didn't realize you needed. So we're just rebuilding life essentially, and luckily that my husband's job was still intact because it's in Chico, so that's been a huge blessing. When my daughter was 3, so that was 4 years ago, I had left to go to the store, and my husband and daughter were making salad. And I had been spray painting that day, so I left my ring on the mantle. And I went, and I got home, and where's my ring? And my husband was like, well, Bailey played with it, but it can't be far, it can't. So she had put it on her thumb, and he said, okay, put that back, and was doing what he was doing. So the ring was gone, and we checked the garbage, and we moved furniture, and we checked all our toys and moved dressers, and the ring had been gone for 4 years. So I didn't want a new ring. This ring was a pass down. My husband's grandfather was a jeweler, and so it's a pass down ring. And I didn't want a new ring. I wanted that ring, and it's got to be here somewhere. Every time we moved something, I figured maybe it's there. And so after the fire, of course, we had thought maybe maybe she should have took it outside. Maybe it went under the deck. And so the intent had been for the last 3 years, hey, hon, how about this weekend? Let's pull up a couple boards on the deck. We'll see if it's, okay, yes, this weekend, and you know how that goes. So we had been up at the house after the fire, and we're digging and sorting and looking through things. And it was the end of the day, and I was frustrated because you find, a coffee cup, and you go to pick it up, and the handle comes off. I was just done, and I wanted to leave. So my husband is, he's always up for the next, where must this thing be? And he's like, we should gather, the ash right here, kind of motioning to where our deck was, and we should put it in buckets, and then, and then we can sort it later. I said, okay, hon. I want to go home now. And he goes, it's got to be right here. And so I jokingly, I'm brushing my boot through the ash, and I go, show yourself, ring. And it feels like 30 seconds later, I don't know the minutes, but he goes, no way. And he bends down and grabs a handful of ash. And I thought, you're messing with me. Come on, man. And then he starts doing this. And then he pulls it out and has my ring that had fallen under the deck. and the deck had burned down over the top of it, and there it was, and it wasn't damaged, and I totally lost it, and I said, you know, they can clear this house now. This is all I wanted, you know. The only prevention that I can think about or warning that would have been more useful is just to kind of educate people on fire weather and the propensity of fire, especially in low humidity. And my request would be, if there's a full wildland call out, send out a warning. And, you know, people will do with the information what they will, but had I not been listening to the scanner, we wouldn't have got out when we were. That would be my advice. Don't ever wait till you're told. Be aware of your conditions around you. Be aware of how long it takes to get out. Also be aware that the traffic will be horrendous. I would encourage people to listen to the scanner during fire season. Be familiar with what calls sound like and what normal a wildland call out sounds like, and the aircraft traffic. And I know that's a bit, I don't know what the word is, eclectic, or, you know, you don't want to sit on the scanner all day. However, if something's going down, it's good. I mean, I would find out that roads were closed before they're, you know, or when they're being closed, rather than driving up and finding them closed. I guess my advice would be to, you know, be real aware of your surroundings in summertime especially.